All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
He is here.
I am here. Yeah, no, not at all. Alhamdulillah.
How are you?
I am well. Alhamdulillah. Let's see. Are we supposed to be streaming? Oh, we're already streaming. Okay.
It's okay.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. All right, so I just had a nice long discussion with Sister Karima. So today, for Wednesday class, this is going to be the last class, inshallah. We're going to be launching a different type of class. Inshallah, we're going to be launching a book club in a few weeks, inshallah. So this will be the last.
Where you read a book and then discuss it.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, inshallah. Don't know what it's going to be about yet, but coming soon, inshallah. But as promised, we're going to continue with the topic of food and drink. So we're on the topic of what type of food are you allowed to eat in Islam? What type of drink are you allowed? And what type are you not allowed? So let's start with food that, well, the general principle in Islam is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made everything. And if he's made everything, he made it for our consumption. He made it for our benefit. He made this world for our benefit. So the default is if you find something and you don't have no idea what this is, what's the default? Do you avoid it or can you eat it? In Islamic law, the default is the opposite.
Guess what?
The default in Islamic law is that things are permissible unless they're proven to be impermissible.
Okay.
Now, normally people would think the opposite.
Yeah.
They'd say, you got to be on the safe side, you got to avoid things. That's actually not the case. The default is everything is allowed because Allah created everything for us, unless there's evidence to prove that it's been prohibited. Okay, so that's the general rule. Now, there are categories where Allah has prohibited certain types of food for us. Why did he prohibit certain things? Because they're bad for us. Anything that Allah told us not to do, it's because there's something harmful for us at the individual level or the societal level, on a spiritual level or on a physical level. Sometimes you can't tell if it's more spiritual or if it's more physical, or is it more individual or is it more societal. But what we do know is that Allah doesn't just randomly pick things and say, yeah, you know what, that specific animal that's going to be forbidden for you, that one's allowed, that one's forbidden. It's not random. There's a wisdom behind what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to do. So among the animals that Allah has forbidden for us to eat, so we got plants and animals, right? We're pretty much eating. All the plants on earth, we're allowed to eat them. We're going to get to intoxicants, but outside of that, all plants are allowed. When it comes to animals, animals are in a different category because they're living things in ways that plants are not living. And they have, they have blood, they're creatures. So there's an exception to the rule that we're allowed to utilize these creatures for labor and we're allowed to utilize them for food. But there's some restrictions that have been put in place. So among the restrictions, we have categories. The first category is land animals. Out of all the animals that live and walk on land, normal animals, we're not talking about vermin and insects, but just land animals. There's two categories of animals that are prohibited. Category number one is the pig. All right, so anything that is coming from a pig is prohibited to consume. So what you find is it's not only pig meat, but it's also pig fat. It's also any other part of a pig that people eat. So what do people eat in general? One of the things that's very common is lard. So especially in Mexican cuisine, lard is actually pig fat. So they actually cook their tortillas in lard. It's very, very common. So what a Muslim needs to do is they need to be careful. Not only are you checking to make sure there's no pork or there's no ham in your food, but you need to make sure that the type of oil or the type of grease or the type of fat that they're using is not going to be coming from lard, because lard is coming from pigs. So that's something where people need to be careful. Sometimes people are not very careful about that. So they'll go to a restaurant and they'll order a taco or a burrito, and they don't realize that that tortilla of the burrito was actually cooked in lard. So this is a little bit better here in California, because many people are becoming more cognizant of the fact that lard is not very healthy. And also there's a lot of people who are going like vegan, vegetarian, and all that stuff. So they're trying to avoid lard. So what you find is, or keto, yeah. So when you go to like restaurants now, especially more like, hipster type of healthy restaurants and all that, they will actually write on the wall, they'll say, we do not use lard in our beans. We do not use lard in our tortillas. And that's a good thing. So you do need to make sure, and you need to check to make sure that you're not consuming any lard because it's coming from a pig. The second thing when it comes to a pig is gelatin. And we'll get to gelatin about transformation and all that. We'll get to that near the end of class. But gelatin can come from many different sources. So when it's lard is pretty much coming from pig fat. Gelatin can come from a vegetarian source. It can come from a fish source. It can come from a beef source, or it can come from a pig source. So it's coming from these other sources, not really a concern. When it's coming from a pig source, that's when it becomes a cause of concern. So we got to look out for that, and we'll talk about transformation in a little bit. Why did Allah forbid pigs for us? Well, He did not specify exactly the details, but He gave us the general reason why. It has something to do with impurity. So a pig is basically dirty. If you look at the language, when you want to insult somebody, you call them a pig, right? Say you eat like a pig, and you look like a pig. Say you're like a hog. It's all the words that are associated with pig, even in the Christian culture language where they eat pigs, they're all negative. So there's something that's generally been considered filthy when it comes to pigs. And if you look at pigs, actually, if you just look at their behavior, they're among the dirtiest animals that are there. In fact, there are toilets that are called pig toilets. They used to exist in India and China, where basically pigs are underneath the toilet and they're waiting for people to go to the bathroom, and they're going to eat the remnants of what comes out. And there are still pig toilets in India and in Goa today, right? So it shows you that they're pretty gross animals, okay? So there's something to do with the fact that they're dirty. So people will say, well, what if you grow them in a laboratory and you don't let them eat this and you don't let them eat that and all that? There's something that Allah has made in them that they're dirty. Allah has prohibited that for a reason. To connect it to impurity and filthiness, there's probably some spiritual effect that you have. Like I said, everything is prohibited either due to individual or societal, physical or spiritual harm. So there's probably some connection between some type of spiritual harm that comes from eating pig. So we're told not to do it. So it's category number one of land animals. Category number two are carnivorous animals. So animals that have fangs or claws, and they hunt with those fangs and claws, those are in the category of prohibition. The reason why they're prohibited is because they eat carrion, they eat dead meat. And we're not supposed to be eating dead meat. So there's probably some connection between the fact that they're eating the meat and it's mixing with the rest of the animal, and they became prohibited. So what are some carnivorous land animals that do that, which we're not allowed to eat? Tiger. Lions.
Wolves.
Wolves belong in that category. What else?
Pig.
Pigs are already there. Yeah, separate category. What else?
What about bears? Bear, no.
So question, right? So here's the category. Do bears hunt with their fangs or their claws? Or not, or they don't?
I think they hunt with their claws.
They do hunt with their claws. So bears are in the category. What else?
So what would an elephant?
Interesting question. So scholars have actually debated this issue historically about whether elephants with their tusks, do they count as hunters or not? So it's funny that the Hanafi school, which is the school that I specialized in, they actually said that elephants fall into that category. But when you look at elephants and you study them, they're actually herbivores. They're not carnivores.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the weak opinions in the school. Elephants should actually be in the category of herbivores, so they do not hunt with their fangs, because those tusks are not really fangs. They could, kill somebody with them, but that's not what they do. So elephants should be allowed.
Do people eat elephants?
People do eat elephants.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
How do you say?
In India, man. So I don't know how you'd slide it. You figure it out somehow. All right. So you get wolves, foxes, dogs, cats, hyenas, monkeys, all of these things. Okay. So all of those land animals that hunt, carnivorous animals, fall in the prohibited category. Category number 2 is birds.
Hmm.
So when it comes to birds, you can eat all types of birds. You can eat pigeon, you can eat a duck, you can eat a chicken, you can eat quail, so many different types of birds. But the type of birds you're not allowed to eat are the carnivorous birds that hunt with their talons. So what type of birds are those? Hawk,
Eagle?
eagle,
Hmm.
falcon,
What did you say?
falcon,
Oh, falcon.
vulture.
Oh, yeah.
What supposedly caused COVID-19?
Bats.
Bats, supposedly.
Are they birds?
Peacock.
They count in there.
Peacock is not eating, right?
Peacock does not.
No.
Peacock does not. Yeah.
Owl.
So these are
Owl.
I don't know about an owl, actually.
Owls, they eat mice.
They eat mice,
They,
and they
so
hunt
then
with
they
their.
use hunt,
Oh, okay, interesting. There you go. So those are the ones you're not allowed to eat those. Okay, so so we got land animals and we got birds that you're not allowed. Sea creatures. When it comes to sea creatures, all of them are allowed. Okay,
Even the crabs, or even the lobster.
even the lobsters, even the crabs, even and all those things. So the question now is, well, what about a shark? Because what you'd say is, well, the lion, it hunts other animals. The shark is like the lion of the sea. It hunts other animals, kills other animals. It still falls in the category of being allowed. Why? Because there's something about being in the sea that changes the blood of those animals,
Mhm.
right? You don't need to slaughter them the way you need to slaughter animals. Eating some of the blood of the fish or whatever it is, when it mixes with the meat, and so it's not in the same category as a land animal at all, even from a scientific perspective. So there's something connected with the fact that these sea creatures have all been permissible. Right now, there was a few scholars who said it's only in the fish category of sea creatures, right? Outside of that, but this is a minority opinion. The majority of scholars have said all creatures in the sea, octopus, squid, eels, all types of fish, everything is allowed that's in the sea. Okay, so all of those are going to be allowed.
What about amphibians?
So we're getting to that, which is a mixture, right? Yeah. So we're getting to that.
Scouts, all that.
Yeah. All of those are fine. Yeah, all of those. The next category is insects and vermin, not in the category of land animals, meaning like land, walking on the land. So you got little insects like bugs and ants and grasshoppers and spiders and yeah, exactly, scorpions, snakes, all of those things, right? So when it comes to those, scholars have different opinions here. They looked at that and they said, well, we don't have anything so clear cut. We have a hadith about the Prophet ﷺ allowing Khalid ibn al-Walid to eat lizard, but it was a type of desert lizard. It was like a larger type of lizard that was there. So the scholars basically said, because these can probably be harmful for you if you're eating them and things like that, with the exception of the locust, which is like well known, they fall in the disliked category, or maybe they're allowed, maybe they're disliked just because they could potentially harm you. But if they can't harm you, everything's fine, they're clean, technically you're allowed to eat them as well. Okay. Next category is dead animals. So any animal that has died naturally without being slaughtered is called carrion. It's a dead animal and you're not allowed to eat it at all. So if it dies of an illness, you can't eat it. If it dies from strangling, you cannot eat it. If it falls off of a mountain or a hill or something like that, you cannot eat it. If it gets wounded by another animal and then bleeds out and dies, you're not allowed to eat it. So what's the reason behind that? probably the reason behind that is that once an animal gets slaughtered, all of the blood starts coming out. When an animal dies before it gets slaughtered, the blood remains inside and the blood starts to mix in with the meat. And we're not supposed to be eating blood, and there's something that happens to that meat. Allah has prohibited eating any type of dead animals. Very, very clear cut in the Quran. So what used to happen is that there were people where if they want to eat like a chicken or something, like in the UK, what they would used to do is they would first take a chicken and they would snap its neck, or they would strangle it and it dies, and then they'd chop it up into pieces and they cook it. And that's a chicken. You're not allowed to eat that because the animal died before it was slaughtered, regardless of who's slaughtering. Right? You can come and say all the Bismillah on the meat that you want. You can't eat it. There's nothing that you can do to make this halal to eat anymore because the animal died before it got slaughtered, before it got killed properly. Okay, so that's a category of dead animals.
Doesn't that kill it though, if you like snap its neck?
It dies.
Yeah.
But so the thing is, the prohibition is if the animal died before it got slaughtered, you can't eat it because then it's carry on.
Okay.
So if you snapped its neck or if you strangled it and it died, and then you cut it into pieces, the blood has remained in the body. Then the blood's going to spill out, but the heart has stopped beating.
Right.
So it's not going to, the blood is going to not pour out the way they would normally pour out.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So that is the prohibition on dead animals. The next category is intoxicants. So anything that can intoxicate you is prohibited. So all alcoholic beverages like beer and wine and all of those things is prohibited. Anything which can intoxicate you like recreational drugs, marijuana, heroin, hashish, cocaine, all of those things, same category, is prohibited. So not only is it prohibited, but even a small or tiny amount is going to be prohibited. So if you take 1 teaspoon of beer, you cannot get drunk. But even one small amount, a tiny amount of that is going to be prohibited if it could intoxicate you in large amounts. Okay, we'll get to questions in a moment, inshallah. So what's the reason? Right? Why prohibit something like that? So people will say, well, what about recreational drugs that are not addictive, right? Or what if it's not going to hurt people? Or what if why shouldn't caffeine is also harmful, it's a stimulant, it should also be prohibited in small amounts or whatever it is. They're not in the same category, right? Alcohol and recreational drugs are in a completely different category where you say that they can potentially be harmful or whatever it may be. Okay, so these intoxicants are not allowed even in the smallest quantity because Allah wanted to close the door and not allow people to be tempted by there's a Lay's commercial. Once you have one, you can't stop or something like that, right? That's the problem. That's the problem that many people will face. So intoxicants are not allowed. The next one, I'll take questions at the end, inshallah. Next category is impure substances. Anything that's impure. So we covered impurity several weeks ago. Remember, anything that gets on your clothes or your body and you need to wash it off. So what are the impure substances we talked about? Blood, vomit, pus, like part of the blood, pus as well, yes.
Urine.
Yeah, anything that comes out of the private parts. Urine, feces, pre-seminal fluid, semen, all of those things. All of these things, you're not allowed to consume them. Now, when it comes to blood, now we have a question about blood that remains after slaughter. So if you have a rare steak, and there's some blood in there, right? Or if you are eating liver, it's got some blood in there, right? These things don't fall in the same category as blood. The blood that's mentioned, and it's mentioned very clearly in the Quran, it's talking about the blood that's poured out, that comes out of the animal. The blood that remains, a small amount of blood that remains, is considered to be overlooked. So if you have a rare steak, not prohibited for you,
Okay.
right? In fact, Aisha, she was cooking in a pot and there was some remnants of the blood there. And the Prophet ﷺ saw that and he said, this is okay, right? So we're talking about the blood that comes out, not the blood that remains in the pot or remains within the meat when you're cooking it. Next category is harmful substances. When it comes to harmful substances, anything where it gets to the point where it's likely going to harm you, depending on how much you take, is going to be prohibited. Smoking hookah, vaping, depending on how much you're doing and things like that, it's going to fall in the prohibited category, depending on the probable harm that's going to have to your body. Now, someone will say, well, what about chocolate, right? What about Coke? What about coffee, right? The thing is, those substances, if you take an excess of anything, it's going to harm you at some level. But when you're talking about substances like when smoking, even on a small amount, when research and studies have proven that even a small amount is going to cause like significant harm, whereas these other things, small amounts are not going to cause that level of harm, they're not in the same category. So I know people make excuses all the time and they go, you know what, well, then air should be prohibited and chocolate should be prohibited and all that stuff. There's a difference. So basically anything that's proven to be harmful to the extent that you're going to be taking it and there's no need for it, it's going to be harmful. It's prohibited because your body is a trust and Allah has given you this. All right. The second last thing is what's called istihala and istihlak, transformation and dilution. So transformation, istihala, basically means when something that's prohibited transforms into a different substance or a different category. What do you do in that situation? I'm gonna turn down the volume so we don't get disturbed. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. So transformation, let's say you have wine. Wine is intoxicating. If wine changes to let me just manually do this. Okay. If wine changes to vinegar, either because you put something in it or because you allow it to ferment, is it still prohibited because it was wine? It's not. It's not wine anymore, but it was produced from something that was prohibited for you, but it's transformed into a completely different substance. So it's going to be allowed. So technically wine vinegar that doesn't have the intoxicating effects of that anymore left is actually allowed. Now, what about something that is, let's take a future example, like recycled urine. Okay, it doesn't sound appetizing, but NASA developed, I don't know if you guys ever seen this movie called Waterworld. It was like one of the biggest flops, Kevin Costner. They put so much money into it, it was a complete failure. What they did was they show him urinating, and then he puts the urine into this thing which filters it, and then he goes and he drinks it. All right, you seen that? You've heard of this thing. So NASA just invented a machine recently, about I think a year and a half ago, that does exactly that. So for their International Space Station and the astronauts they're going to send in outer space, they want to be able to take less water. They're going to recycle their urine, get the water aspect out of it, clean it, and then they're going to be able to drink it again. So what's happening is you say, well, urine is prohibited. It's in one of the impure substance category. Once it's changed into another substance, istihala or transformation has taken place. It's not the same substance anymore. It's allowed for you to do that because it's not the same thing anymore, right? The scholars gave another example. Let's say you have a fruit tree and somebody comes and urinates next to the fruit tree, and the fruit's going to come out of it eventually. You say that's gross. Well, some remnants of that mixed with water somehow got into the fruit, but it is transformed into something completely different. That fruit that comes out is not the same thing as whatever went in there. So you say this process of transformation from one substance into another substance makes that new substance not prohibited anymore. And that's where the issue of gelatin comes in.
Yeah.
So when it comes to gelatin, you have scholars as well as chemists. They have a disagreement. When it comes to gelatin, has there been a sufficient amount of change in porcine gelatin to say that it's a different substance, or there's not been a sufficient amount of change. So people like Dr. Ahmed Sakr, you told me,
Yeah.
rahimahullah, he had made the argument that it is sufficient amount of change. There is the International Fiqh Council, who had a consultant, I forgot the doctor's name. He said that it's a sufficient amount of change. There are other scholars like Sheikh Yasser Qadi, who's also chemical engineering, major and stuff like that. They say it's not a sufficient amount of change. So there is a difference of opinion among Muslim scholars on the issue of whether gelatin has sufficiently changed or not, right? My advice is, if it's easy to avoid it, right? As much as you possibly can. The second is dilution, istihlak. Dilution means that there's such a small, minuscule amount of the prohibited substance. It's so tiny that it's almost non-existent. So this comes from the principle of, if somebody has a lake and you're on one side of the lake and you saw somebody go to the bathroom inside the lake, disgusting, but you're on the other side, can you make wudu from the lake? The principle is, there's so much water in a lake that you can basically discount whatever had mixed in there. It's almost negligible. It's almost like nothing. But if you had a little tiny bathtub and somebody urinates in that, and then you try to make wudu from that, that's not a negligible amount. So that's a different amount. So we're talking about something that's so minuscule can be negligible. Where does this issue really come into play today? When it comes to rennet. Rennet.
Oh, yeah.
So rennet is a substance that's used in producing cheese. All cheese uses rennet in order to make it. So rennet can come from beef, or it can come from pork. And that's why some people, they come along and they find like a bag of Doritos and they're like, wait a minute, those Doritos chips is coming from pork rennet. And some flavors like Cool Ranch, or what, I didn't like look it up recently, but like back in the days, they used to use these other types of porcine rennet in their chips. So now the question is, are you allowed to consume that, or you're not allowed to consume that? So the answer is, the amount of rennet in the cheese that you're going to be produced is so minuscule. It's like a 0.000 something percent of the entire thing. That rennet is going to be overlooked. So you don't need to consider, even if it's coming from a porcine source, that's considered to be something that you don't need to worry about. Scholars differ on this, but this is the opinion of Sheikh Yasser Qadi, who wrote an entire article on this. So that's when it comes to rennet. The last thing is necessity. When it comes to necessity, if you need to consume something that's prohibited for you, and it's going to be like medicine for you, or there's no other choice, right? Are you allowed in that case? The answer is yes. So if you have a pneumonia medicine, for example, that has alcohol in it, and there's no other way, you're not drinking it to get intoxicated, but there's no other alternative than this pneumonia medicine, you're allowed to take it. If you need morphine because you're in extreme pain and there's no other alternative for it, you can take it. The COVID vaccine, for example, people who are taking it, there were some mixtures of the COVID vaccine that had some porcine elements, or they had aborted fetus cells and stuff like that, right? The scholars gave the fatwa and said, this is needed. There's no alternative available. You're allowed to take it. When it comes to heparin, most heparin that's produced in the world, when you're going to get a surgery or something like that, doctors will administer heparin, something to do with clotting, or avoid blood clots or something like that, right? Majority of heparin that's produced in the world is coming from pork sources. So ideally, they should try to produce it from a different source, but since this is what's available and you can't get any other heparin from any other source pretty much in most of the world, it's going to be in the allowed category. Now, if your multivitamin has pork source in there, right, in the capsule or whatever it is that in the necessity category? Multivitamins are not in that category, and usually you could find some alternative, whatever it is. So when there's a necessity, it becomes allowed. When there's no necessity for it, It's not going to be in the allowed category. Okay. And the last thing on food is when it comes to utensils. So one thing that Allah has forbidden, or the Islam has forbidden for us, is that you're not supposed to use gold and silver utensils that are complete gold or complete silver. It's viewed as extravagance. So this was prohibited by the Prophet, peace be upon him. Likewise, if someone has a golden toilet, for example, it sounds crazy. I visited a palace. I visited a palace in southern England, old palace of like some king or whatever, right? And he had a toilet seat made of gold. Okay, so something like this is just waste of money, not allowed. Gold plated, different category. If you're trying to show that your utensils and your cup and your plates and all that, you're trying to show that it makes it look like it's real gold, but it's just gold plated. You're trying to give off that extravagant look. Shouldn't be doing that. And something interesting about, there's, if you guys heard of this dessert called barfi, it's an Indian dessert, right? They actually, sometimes they put this gold foil and silver foil on top of it. It's actually gold and it's silver. You're actually eating gold and silver, right? So is that allowed? The answer is technically yes. You're allowed to eat it. You're allowed to eat it. Now you'd think like, well, it's so minuscule, it has so little value, but technically you're eating a part of a metal, right? So I'm like, I researched it, I looked into it, I'm like, are you even allowed to eat this? The answer is yeah, you're allowed to eat it. So anyways, that's food and drink, inshallah. Questions? Open up to questions, yes.
I was wondering when you were talking about things permitted to eat, what about snakes?
It falls in the vermin insect category.
So you can't.
No, it falls in the disliked category where you can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, so, you know how like the Bible forbids eating pork? Like, why do Christians do that all the time then?
So, well, what happened with Christians is that Paul came, and when Paul wrote most of the books of the Bible, he said that the law doesn't apply to us anymore. He's saying all that stuff that was there before doesn't apply to them. That was his view. Yeah. What's that?
Beer battered fish.
So beer battered fish. So when it comes to intoxicants, right? There's a few things. Number one, there's two categories. Number one, there's alcohol. So there are some alcohols which don't intoxicate, like sorbitol, xylitol. Alcohols which don't intoxicate are fine. Alcohols which intoxicate are two categories. Category number one are those which are alcoholic beverages that have been prepared for intoxication. Category number two are things which happen to have alcohol in them, like vanilla extract, for example, right? So when it comes to this, you have few opinion of scholars. Anything which has alcohol in it, even if it could potentially intoxicate you, but nobody is taking it for the purpose of intoxication, like NyQuil or vanilla extract or things like that. If you add this into a food substance, like vanilla ice cream, it has alcohol in it, because if it has vanilla extract, it actually technically has alcohol in it. If you extracted the alcohol from the vanilla ice cream, from the vanilla extract, and you were to put it into a cup and you drank it, you could technically get drunk off of it. But the ice cream is mixed up in such a way where you cannot separate it out. So can you eat? I have this rule, basically. The rule is the death test. If you eat so much ice cream, will you get intoxicated first or will you die first? You will overdose on ice cream and die, right? So if that's the case, even if there's alcohol in a product, it's not going to be prohibited, right? That's the general rule which applies across the board. Now, this is what many scholars have said. Now, there's a small minority of scholars who said even if it was an alcoholic beverage, still going to be allowed as long as it cannot intoxicate you. The majority of, and this is actually my view, this is the view that I lean towards. The majority of scholars said, yes, it's true. The beer battered fish, if you eat it, you will die before you get intoxicated. But remember the impure substances category? They add alcoholic beverages in that category and say it's actually intrinsically impure. If alcohol gets on your shirt, you must wash it off before you're allowed to pray. It's the view of the majority of scholars. Minority of scholars, like Imam San'ani, Shawkani, Ibn Hazm, and others, they say no, it's not impure either, right? So that's the view that I lean towards in terms of evidence, but it's not something that I tell people to do.
With regard to, for example, the beer batter,
Mhm.
that's, the alcohol's cooked out of it by the time you cook it.
So if it's cooked out of it, then it's perfectly fine. Everyone says it's fine.
Okay,
Well,
that's
some
what I
studies say that it takes about 8 hours to cook out.
So that the issue is about whether it cooks off or whether it doesn't cook off, whether it mixes in or not. When it comes to, let's say, mustard,
thought.
yeah, when it says like Grey Poupon mustard and all that, so it's not cooking,
Right.
it's still in
that's
there,
different, yeah.
but you'll still die a mustard overdose before you get
Before you get-
intoxicated,
yeah.
right? So that's
You said
what
that's
it
the
comes.
minority.
It is the minority opinion.
So same goes for like sushi rice that has mirin and.
Same goes with sushi rice.
Come
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
What about kombucha?
Kombucha is not an alcoholic beverage, although it does have some alcohol in it, but it cannot intoxicate you in large amounts. So you will die from most types of kombucha, you will die of overdose before you get intoxicated even a little bit. So kombucha is fine.
What is it, by the way?
Kombucha
I've heard
is
of it, but I don't know
fermented
what it
tea. So it's supposed to be
Oh.
very, very healthy for you.
Okay.
It's a type of fermented tea, and it has a little bit of alcohol content in there. But there was a Vice article actually where somebody tried to buy expired kombucha from, he bought every single brand of expired kombucha that he could get, went home and he drank it, got extremely sick, but did not get intoxicated at all. So it doesn't have alcohol content to intoxicate you unless you get the type of kombucha that is alcoholic kombucha.
Okay.
So when it says non-alcoholic, it has small trace quantities of alcohol, but doesn't qualify as an alcoholic beverage.
Right, like.
Like non-alcoholic beer and all
Yeah,
that
yeah.
stuff, right? So they have small quantities that does not make it prohibited.
So on that question, the 0% alcohol, like Heineken and these big companies have started making that as well.
Hmm.
It's just best to avoid. Right?
It's better to avoid the big brands, right? And that non-alcoholic, beer and stuff like that, that's good for people who are like recovering and they're trying to quit and they used to drink alcohol in the past. If it's a Muslim, they should try to avoid it, especially when it comes to the brands, right? They should avoid the brands. But if they like, let's say they just like fermented barley drink. I don't know who likes that, it's pretty gross, but if somebody just for some reason they like that thing, that's fine. It's like wine and grape juice.
Would that fall into the category of like imitating the?
So two things. It depends. Number one, it depends on your intention, whether you're trying to imitate what people are doing in their alcohol. And number two, it depends on whether the style and the presentation and the culture surrounding it, if you're trying to imitate that. So if you're sitting there and you're like playing cards and you got a bunch of poker chips and you got a bunch of non-alcoholic alcohol, and then you pull out like wine cups and then you're holding it exactly the same way and you're trying to imitate everything about the culture, it'll fall in that category. If you're not doing that and you're just drinking it for the drink, it's not going to fall.
So that would be like mocktails, basically.
Like like a mocktail, I guess.
So that would fall into that category, like trying to imitate.
No,
Well, the only difference is that it doesn't have alcohol.
well,
The presentation's the same.
is it no, I think mocktails would probably not fall in that category because the way that people drink it and the way that it gets served and all that stuff. If the rest of the culture around it was in the same category, then I would say yeah. So I think intention plays a big role and culture plays a big role, right? So like there was like a Muslim group, for example, they just rented out some place, like some island somewhere, and they shut down the whole bar, but they were making mocktails for the entire weekend, for everybody else, and like different flavors and all that stuff. I don't think that should be in the category of imitation because they're not trying to put the brands there, they're not trying to serve it. These were the drinks that were serving, so they shut down the whole bar. So something like that I think should be okay. So I think there's like a little gray area. You just got to avoid trying to purposely imitate. But if you just like the drink, you're like, I like I like tomato juice with spices in there. They call it a virgin Bloody Mary. Okay, fine. You like the taste? You like the taste? No. All right, inshallah. Anything else?
I have heard, I know you said about the sea animals, but I have heard a lot about shrimps. Baby
So
shrimp.
the Hanafi school is the one school. You're Turkish?
No, Tajik.
Tajik, okay, kind of close. So are you guys Hanafi in the
Yes.
Okay, that's why. So the Hanafi school, it says that the only thing that's allowed in the sea is fish. All the other schools said everything is allowed in the sea. So what is the Hanafi school considered to be fish? Whales are fish, sharks are fish are fish, eels are fish. And then what happened was when it came to shrimp in particular, the scholars looked at the Arabic dictionaries and they said, is a shrimp a type of fish? And some of the dictionaries actually said, yes, it's a type of, now no one's going to classify shrimp as a fish. What happened is there was a split within the scholars of the Hanafi school saying that if a shrimp is considered to be fish, then we're allowed to eat it even in our school. And if it's not, then we're not allowed to eat it. So they said lobsters for sure not allowed, crabs not allowed, right? They said eels for sure allowed. They said this is 100% considered to be fish, whether it is or it's not category. Shrimp was debatable whether it falls in the category of fish or not. That's what happened in that school.
Are there other schools that allow lobster?
All the other schools allow everything in the sea.
Can you jump over once in a while?
I lean towards that opinion.
Okay.
So that's my personal view.
Also regarding the chocolate. There is a chocolate types mostly in Russian stores.
With the alcohol inside. Yeah.
But it's like basically a little bit.
So it comes back down to if you could eat enough of those, right? To get intoxicated, but also this type of chocolate, when you bite it, does it separate out? So there's a type of Belgian chocolate which has the alcohol in it, right? So yeah. So that one you should avoid because you can separate it out. So if it's not mixed in like the ice cream, so if it can separate out, we shouldn't consume it. Inshallah, we'll leave it at that. Inshallah.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.